Bonkers Network, we would like to remind everybody that certain topics of discussion may not be comfortable for all listeners. Certain viewpoints may not reflect those of our partners, sponsors, affiliates, our hosts, or that of our guests. We would like to encourage everybody to keep a respectful and open climate of discussion for all topics, no matter how disturbing they may be. So viewer discretion is advised.
Discoveries mankind has ever experienced.
And that is why we bring you the Bald and Bonkers Show.
Baby, you can get on my boat and make it rock.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Sunday night. I hope that those of you who attended last night's show weren't too freaked out, because it sounds like this is going to be another freaky one.
Yes,
we welcome today James Brodie from BUFOG. James, thank you for coming on. And why don't you introduce everybody? Introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. I am a BUFOG investigator, so that's the Birmingham UFO group, but I've been actively involved in both UFO and paranormal investigation for the last 25 years. Been a member of various groups, experienced a range of different things. I'm also researching for a book as well at the minute, but thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, once you've finished your book, you'll need to give us the links to that, and we'll share that out for you,
Oh, well, thank you very much, appreciated.
No problem.
Oh, yeah.
So James, we were talking before we come on. Can you tell us a wee bit about your first ever? Let's just jump straight into it for our guests in the chat and everything. Let's just jump straight in it because we've got about an hour.
Yep.
How did you get into this? How did this UFO phenomenon actually start for you?
Yeah, so for me, it started when I was 18 and I had my first sort of UFO experience. Literally, I live in Birmingham, so if you're outside of the UK, it's the UK's second largest city. I was walking the dog. It was November. It was a clear night. I was walking the dog around the block, looked up in the sky, and I saw what appeared to be a comet, but it was arching across the sky, and it appeared to go behind something. And for a split second, I saw a glimpse of a sort of a shape that it illuminated. I went home and looked out of the window. I opened up the window, so I was looking into the back of the garden, and I saw an object sort of like moving across the sky and got closer and closer until it appeared to be hovering over one of the trees in the garden. And I saw it, and I sort of like casually asked that. I said, to the sky, I can't tell what you are. You need to show me something more. And what it did was it rotated so I could see all the way around it, and then it went over the house. I was very lucky that my sister came in at the last minute and saw that something had gone over the house, and I was kind of quite amazed by that. So that was the very first experience. But then what really got me interested in this was 12 years later, I get a completely random knock at the door, and there is a man and woman dressed in black. The man was sort of like late sort of 50s, slightly dishevelled. The lady was 6 foot tall, blonde hair, sort of pulled back, blue eyes, quite gaunt looking, and said, "Would like to ask you some questions about your experience." And then had a very sort of bizarre question answer session for about half an hour, and they were also interested to find out whether I'd had any paranormal experience. And so for me, that gave me that initial link that maybe both the UFO and paranormal experience were part of the same, were part of that same sort of experience.
Can I ask you, the first UFO you seen, what did it actually look like? Was it like a disc, or was it like a cigar shape? Or?
Yeah, sure. So what this was is this was shape of a rugby ball or American football,
right.
And it was a case of it was silver with an orange glow. Now part of that orange glow might have come off from the sulphurous lights, so that might have been that, but it was certainly metallic. It didn't have any discerning sort of markings on it. There weren't any portals or anything like that on it, and it was completely silent. And it's one of those classic things where you see it and you make a note at the time. The only sort of interaction I had was that I got quite a lot of static electricity, and so all this sort of hairs on my arms and obviously when I had hair, that was
We're the same.
I'm in good company. So it's a case of there was some sort of static there during the experience, and and that was the only sort of like physical sort of manifestation of that. But that was the first thing that I could I have a clear memory of seeing.
And seeing all your years of investigating UFOs and stuff, have you ever seen anything that was exactly the same as that? As if it was maybe the same species or whatever it was that was visiting you?
Yeah. So it turned out. Let's have a look. So. It would have been in my early 20s when UFO conferences were still quite small. There was one on the outskirts of Birmingham, and they brought in a report. They brought in a ufologist from Brazil, and he was showing pictures from some of the encounters that some of the people had there. And at a distance, it looked like it was very similar to what I had seen, but it's a case of I couldn't necessarily say that with 100% certainty, but there were certainly similarities there, and it made me think that maybe there is something there. I mean, one of the things that got me, of course, was that I saw this at sort of like 8 o'clock in the evening in Birmingham, a large metropolitan city. I was expecting the next day to see it all in the newspapers and everything, and I remember going out and buying all the local papers, and there was absolutely nothing. I remember at the time being gobsmacked that. Had I really seen that, or was that something unique to myself? And the only thing I've got in my favour is that my sister also saw it. When she was coming through the house, so there was somebody else at least that could verify that I'd seen something. Yeah,
very interesting. Dakota?
I got to admit, that's certainly lucky that you at least had a secondary witness. There's been a couple of times where all of a sudden I've had what could be, groundbreaking experience. Holy crap, this is something big.
Yeah.
But just recently, I had what looked like a black diamond all of a sudden manifest and fly above me. I didn't even realize that it may be something until it happened to hit the light of the moon. All of a sudden, I started scrambling to get my phone because it was close enough. I could start making out details of the craft.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the second I get my camera out, it's gone. I was like, But the thing was, about a couple weeks earlier, I was told by some of my law enforcement contacts that there may have been a UFO crash in my area.
Oh, wow.
There was lights recorded in the sky, said that a small aircraft was flying kind of erratically, came down, nothing. I would have gotten out to check on it, but unfortunately my car was in the shop. And by the time I got it back, all of a sudden that area caught fire.
Yeah, wow, that's convenient, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
There's actually, just got to break off for a minute, there's a couple of people asking in the chat about you there, Dakota. I think it's because last night he went into one of his weird trances. So he's absolutely fine, guys. Don't worry about him.
Yeah.
But that's the weird thing you're talking about, that it was the shape of a football. I can remember the one that I seen was like half a football. It was like flat on one side. And it was just floating along so slow. But the conversation we had tonight was actually really interesting, because when I take a video and when I take a photo, it didn't show up. But when you change the contrast, you could see the outline of it, which is fascinating. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a case of everything that we see, everything that we hear has a frequency associated with it. So whether it be light, whether it be radio waves, there is a rate or of cycles a second. So for example, things like ultrasound, audio, radio, all those sort of things, that typically has a cycle rate of between 0 to 1,000. That includes brain waves. You have things like shortwave radio, that's got a frequency of between 1,000 and 100,000 hertz a second. This goes right up things to like ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma rays. And one of the things I always tell people is the age-old question is, well, why aren't you able to take a clear picture of something? And that's because, as I tell people, that within our sort of universe, we have a set of frequencies that all sort of phenomena operate at. But what happens if something is coming not from our universe or from maybe another dimension? And in that dimension, it stands to reason that those sort of phenomena will actually have different frequencies. And so you've got to bear in mind that a camera is recording at a particular frequency, and also the frequency of light. What happens if that frequency is, a few thousand hertz difference? Then you might not be picked up. And so you take that even further, and you see that. Imagine that basically at any time you're in a room and you're looking around, and in that room there could be multiple versions of yourself, multiple access to universes, but you can only see what you can see because of the frequency of the light around you. And so we kind of limited from going from one possibility to another possibility due to various sort of frequencies that mean, that you have only got access to some of the information. So it might be that people are able to see, well, for example, cats and dogs see lights at different frequencies. They see ultraviolet lights, things like that, and infrared lights. And it's a case of maybe they are able to see things that we can't see. So, for example, if the classic story of there being, something paranormal inside a cat in a house, often the cat or dog will react to it before we can see it because they are able to interpret information at a different frequency to that our eyes can.
Yeah, it's quite weird with animals because I've noticed with certain tones that humans can't hear them, but animals will. Because I've got a border collie there, and I can't remember what app it was. It was this app that puts out certain tones, but to the human ear, you hear nothing. But the dog is like looking for where it's coming from, which is phenomenal. Dakota, would you like to say something?
Well, that's not really too much out of the question, Chris. She's just probably done because just dogs have much more sensitive hearing than us. But, well, I just had a question, but I just lost it. Well, you did, before the break, you did mention that you were trying to study a lot of frequencies, especially when it came to Nikola Tesla. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tesla essentially was the sort of king of frequency. He sort of believed that frequency can be used as a source of energy. He famously experimented in American neighborhoods where he actually caused a resonation of the surrounding buildings, and actually caused the mini earthquake in his area due to the frequencies that he was experimenting with. And it's a case of that sort of work is what I've been trying to look at. And so, for example, if you have two tuning forks on two separate pieces of wood, and you hit one tuning fork, then the other tuning fork will actually ring as well, because what they've done is they've reached resonance, and so something that you hit once will trigger something else, and then you basically get a sort of transfer of information, which is what causes those two tuning forks to ring. And I very much believe that the human mind or consciousness essentially is ringing that first tuning fork, and then it's looking for something else to resonate, and we get a transference of information, and that's basically is how we get our sort of UFO experience, how we get our paranormal experience, because they're sort of strange set of of frequencies that the conscious mind is trying to resonate with.
That's fascinating, isn't it? It's like, it's weird because when I've been with people and I've seen UFOs and I've pointed them out to people and they're like, "What UFOs?" And I'll be like, "They're right there," and they'll be like, they'll just look at me as if I'm stupid. Why is that? Why do some people see them, but some people can't see them?
That's a great question. So I think there is a certain amount of attunement. So it's a case of what you tend to find is that if you have a sort of positive mindset and you have a general sort of belief, then what it means is that you are more open to experience things. So it's almost like you are. Imagine it's basically like Bluetooth, and what you've basically done is you've basically trained your conscious mind to scan for a Bluetooth device to connect to it. But you've got to have that initial attunement. Now that sometimes can happen completely natural because, you know, as we know, children are more able typically to pick up different experiences. Often, will have different sort of paranormal experience, tends to be very prevalent in children. That's because they are open and they haven't been sort of closed down. And so often what I say is that, someone that is sensitive will have had a strong enough experience as a child so that they remain open and that off switch isn't turned off. What also might happen is that sometimes something happens or you see something, and instead of the conscious mind actually hitting that first tuning fork, it's actually something else that's hit the tuning fork, and then that causes your conscious mind to resonate with it. So there might actually be something that essentially turns you on, and then once that switch is on, I believe that once you've had that experience, then no matter how you try and close it down, you will always then be open to that. It's just how you then attune your mind to deal with that. Some people I know that have had experiences and they've completely shut it out and they still see something, but as far as they're concerned, it's shut down. Whereas it's a case, if you've got an open mind and that's suddenly happened, then you'll find that over time, actually, you train yourself and actually you can open up your mind to do many, many more different things. I mean, a great example is my wife, who is a lot more sceptical than me, but what she does, she keeps me in check. So basically, if I get excited about something, she'll go, "Are you sure about that, James?" Right? Okay, and it's a great sort of like having someone that's maybe a bit more sceptical to be able to say, "Are you sure about that?" and have that sort of check. And I think that's really, really important to have that sense check. But the other really important thing is that everybody's experience is deeply personal. And it's a case of they should be treated with respect. It's a case of, as you rightfully said, two people can be in the same room. They could see something completely different each, or one person might see something, one person might not. And that is down to their own personal attunement. It's down to basically what experience they've had up to that point. And that will then sort of help them to interpret what they're seeing. Because again, that interpretation is key to the individual as well.
Yeah. That's cool.
So, to kind of stick in the area of frequencies, I've done a lot of investigative cases myself, and mostly it's to try to back up the fact that, yes, I've dealt with something and trying to figure out what the hell's going on, where all of a sudden people would start get visions of something. One example is we actually had here on the show was that all of a sudden I started hearing these tones coming out of nowhere. We did all the checks we could think of. Everybody started checking their phones. We killed everybody's mics to figure out which side it was coming from. Then all of a sudden, I see this vision in my mind's eye of a crescent-shaped craft, like a crescent moon. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to write down what looks similar to Sumerian hieroglyphs.
Okay. Just
as kind of an example. How would something like that work? Okay, then.
So what we need to do is kind of, it sounds like we're taking a sideward step, but hopefully it'll explain it. So a lot of the work that I've been looking into is around consciousness and what constitutes to consciousness. Now, when I talk about consciousness, I talk about consciousness as definition as the transference of information from one source to another. Okay, now that also quite nicely fits the sort of definition of things like string theory, which believes that when you get to a subatomic level, what you're left with is strings of energy, and that energy is basically used to create. It can transform, but essentially it is all these. It is still a sort of transference from something to something. Now, what could be happening here is that you are being targeted with a particular frequency, and that frequency, what that's doing is that is actually triggering the act of communication. Now, what that actual communication is depends on the source and and the destination. And it's a case of dependence on what you hear, it could trigger different things in your mind. And so it's a deeply sort of personal sort of experience. So, for example, let me just give you a very quick story. So, there was a guy called Vic Tandy, and he was a scientist, and he thought that his lab was haunted. He'd noticed that things were sort of moving around. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and he began to get really freaked out at it. Now, it turned out he was a keen fencer, and one day he looked at his sword, basically that was by his desk. And he noticed that it was vibrating. And he went, oh, that looks like a sound wave. And he did some investigation. And it turned out that 2 months previously, a new extraction fan had been fitted in in his office, in his lab. But what was happening was it was resonating at a particular frequency. And that frequency was called 18.97, and it's known as the ghost frequency. Now, why that is important is because that is also close to the frequency that your eyes actually resonate as well. And so part of the question around that experience was he actually genuinely experiencing something that was paranormal? Or was it a case of that his eyes were being interfered with, which made him think that he was seeing something? Well, that was an example of a very specific frequency that can be used that will elicit a particular response. And that's something that I've actually used myself before, 18.97, and it's quite a low sort of rumbling sort of frequency. Now, I've listened to it for about half an hour, and in that time, I've thought that I've seen something. And when I say I've seen something, as in there's been something in the room. Now, again, the question you'd have to ask is it a case of that is something that you have genuinely experienced, or is it a case of you've actually got something that is that is basically causing interference with your eyes? And then when you look at brain waves, the human brain operates between 4 hertz and I think it's 35 hertz, and there are very specific emotions that actually have very specific frequencies. So, for example, 47 hertz is the theta wave, and that's something that basically is associated with dreams, deep meditation, REM sleep. You then have things like 7 to 12 hertz, which is about being relaxed, your eyes closed, pre and post sleep, reaching up to that sort of 15 to 24 hertz, which is where you've got active consciousness and sleeplessness. And so this is actually, this is all science facts, by the way. This isn't something this isn't conjecture. This is actually research that shows that the human mind is operating at different frequencies. You also then have something called the Schumann resonance, which basically states that, and this was discovered in the 50s by the German physicist, and then what he said was that at any one time around the world there are thousands of storms going on, and it builds up an electrical charge, and that charge operates. I think I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I think it's around 6 or 7 hertz, and in certain instances, it can actually interfere with the biometrics of living creatures, including ourselves. And so, what this is showing is that different frequencies can affect us at particular levels. They can influence us at ways that we are only now becoming aware of. That is being researched into. But again, we haven't looked at then the larger frequencies when you're talking about different lights and different sort of waves, and how the conscious mind can interact with that. And that might be the sort of gateway to allowing us to explain how we are how we're experiencing these different things, how we interpret it, because it's the transfer of information from source to destination.
That's fascinating, and I think Dakota was looking at me there, and I was looking at him, because I'm going to have to ask you this. You were talking about your eyes.
Yes.
Have a frequency. Can you explain that more about your eyes?
So it's more of a case of the eyes that are receiving light. They're basically operating at a particular frequency, and so it's a case of it's the frequency that the light source that you are getting in, and it's a case of that can be influenced. So you've got to remember that your entire body is a giant antennae. You have, you are designed to pick up the 5 different senses. And that's how you collect your information. Your brain then is the computer that is building up the picture, but it's actually your conscious mind that is dealing with it.
So, just run with me on this. It's just popped into my head. I don't know why. If you could make up a frequency for your eyes, could you make you see something that's not there?
Well, potentially yes. Now then, this is actually again just going back to consciousness for a second. Believe me, this is relevant. There's something called biocentrism. And what biocentrism is it says that instead of using sort of physics and chemistry as the lead for explaining how the world operates around us, it actually basically says that it's actually biology that should be the centre of the sciences that teaches us how we explain things. Now, what he says with regards to consciousness is that there's 2 elements to consciousness. The first is the self. So that's I control my fingers, I can move things around. Now, the second bit is a little bit freaky so bear with me. So what this basically says, everything that we see around us is actually something that is being created by our minds. We can't actually see through the bones of our cranium. Everything we're encountering around us is a construct of the mind. Even the light we see moving around us is actually something that the mind has created. If you look outside of the sky, it's blue. However, that's your mind telling you the sky is blue. It could actually be purple. Okay, it's about how you basically do it, and it's a case of seeing particular things will potentially trigger particular urges. So I know, for example, in animals, things like bees have a particular colour of light, which will mean that you will want to then go and visit that plant and pollinate it. But what it's basically saying is that behind biocentrism is saying that the sort of underlying principle is that reality doesn't actually exist without the conscious mind. Now, this is only something I've recently come to, and it kind of bakes your noodle when you think about this. Because you go, well, hang on, wait a minute. So how does this actually practically work? So how is it that your interpretation, how is that affected by those around you? And it's basically a really sort of different way of sort of viewing the world. So taking away from that sort of physics-based approach, it's about basically saying that actually it's the human mind at some level that is creating our version of reality. And so it's a case of them saying, well, what is it that is actually interacting with us that then triggers these versions of reality? Now, it's only something that I've recently started to investigate, so I can't talk with any confidence about anything more than those sort of original abstract thoughts, but it's just a very different way of thinking. So it's about saying, right then, well, is our reality controlled by physics? Going to string theory, and going back to that same thing about everything being made out of energy, or is it actually the conscious mind actually is what is creating our reality, and reality is unique to ourselves. So then the question is, well, is it a case of I'm in your reality or are you in my reality? So again, there's all those sort of questions to try and ask.
Oh. I think Dakota's got a question for you here. I can tell.
I'm processing this, Chris. I'm processing this too, Chris. Don't try to ping your closeness off on me.
I don't know. I mean, no. But here's the thing, right? So if you were living in my reality, you would be living out my view in reality. So then you could bring up the fact that we are actually living in a simulation. Then,
well, this is it. This is brought very nicely to the point. Now, what I'd say around biocentrism for your viewers, someone you want to check out is a guy called Robert Lanza. Now, he is literally one of the most respected sort of scientists in the modern world. In fact, many people describe him as the modern day Einstein. Okay, he is a specialist. And it's something that he talks. There's a fantastic lecture for an hour. If you look on YouTube, Robert Lands, you'll see it split into two parts. It explains things far better than I'm able to do at this stage. But it's what I'm trying to do is I think that when we try and explain what we see, we're very good at saying, right, this is what we've seen. Okay, this is what we've experienced. But what is the driving factor behind it? And it's a case of trying to get to that fact. There are questions there that we can't possibly hope to answer at this stage. They're great philosophical sort of questions, but I think it's really important that we ask them. Now, I've spoken to multiple people, again, people within certain circles, should we say, and I am told that consciousness is the driving factor behind all of this. And that is, and we need to understand that. And what I say about consciousness is, again, I go back to consciousness being that transference of information. And there has been sort of modern mathematician called I think it's Gioli Tononi. Apologies if I've pronounced it incorrectly. And what he's done is he's created a mathematical model of consciousness where the human brain, as far as we know it, basically is it's got the highest phi scale as we currently understand it, because we haven't met anything that's got that greater sort of ability than ourselves. And then you go down, and you go through to insects and worms, and they're far, far down lower on the scale. However, what he also says is that when you get down to a subatomic level, that everything still has a consciousness. It's lower than 1, but most importantly, it's higher than 0. And I found this a really, really, it's a bit of a sort of warren hole to be going down. It's a case of what does this mean? Well, this could mean one of two things. It could mean that, yes, certainly the simulation argument is becoming more and more prevalent, or it might be saying, actually, is there a joint sort of universal consciousness at some level, and so that great thought about we all at some level being interconnected, and so we literally move from one sort of version of ourselves to some other version of ourselves, whatever that form may be. Now, some people could also use that argument. Well, does that mean that there is some force of creator or something like that? Now, that's something that my personal belief system is. I don't believe that is correct. However, that doesn't mean I'm right. It's a hypothesis that is put out there, and that's what we're trying to understand. So again, how does this come back to all the sort of experience? And so part of the theory that I say is, again, as this earlier, is the fact that the conscious mind is ringing that first tuning fork. And what happens is then you are looking for something to resonate with. When you resonate with it, then you have that transference of information, and that's then triggers whether it be a UFO experience or whether it be a paranormal experience. It's the resonance that you've got. And as you train your mind, you're able to experience more and more different things. Now, I know some people that are able to astral project. I mean, that's something I've been trying to do for some time, and I've kind of hit a bit of a brick wall with that personally, and trying to understand what does that actually mean, because a lot of the experience we have is really subjective. It's a case of it's dependent on your own beliefs. It's relevant to your own personal experiences. And it's trying to find out, is there a sort of is there something that's definitely linking the two? My personal hypothesis is that yes, and there is consciousness that links the two because it's transference of information. But it's a case of what it's also doing is it's taking into account that we live in a multidimensional world, and that a lot of the experience that we see is specifically fourth dimensional, because in the fourth dimension, coordinates aren't actually part of that universe. Everything is instantaneous. Movement from a fixed point doesn't exist in the fourth dimension. It's all instantaneous. So that's why through a lot of abduction experience, you say that somebody's taken through through a solid object, because again, in the fourth dimension, you aren't limited to those sort of experiences. And again, if we were to view ourselves in fourth dimension, what we would do is we would see our own sort of lifespan from being born to death, all simultaneously existing in one point. And it's then saying, how do we interact with that? Are we seeing a snippet of something in that fourth dimension? And again, without I kind of appreciate going through a lot of processes. So the last analogy I'll give you is the TV screen, which is something we talked about earlier. So when you're looking at the TV screen, it's a case of that it's a three-dimensional object that you're looking at, but you're only able to see it through the TV, which is a 2D sort of environment. And so what I'm suggesting is that what we are seeing is a 3D version of a fourth dimensional object. So we can only see it within our own sort of constraints. And it's a case of that experience then projects itself into different ways, dependent on how your brain, how your consciousness has been attuned.
That I'm going to hand you over to Dakota. Because I have got a question for you, but I'll let Dakota go first.
Yeah, sure.
So here's a question for you. One theory I've seen that gets tossed around why certain people may have more experiences may not necessarily be a conscious tuning, but it may actually be a biological, where certain blood groups say, negative seems to be more prevalent. Do you believe that actually may be the case?
So potentially it could be. So as we know, in the sort of 50s and early 60s, both the Soviet Union and the USA spent a lot of money working with psychics, and there was a belief that there was an unofficial sort of psychic war that happened in the late 50s and 60s. Now, a lot of that, again, will depend on your point of view, whether you believe that's hokum or not. But there's been a lot of work that's been done in trying to work out what it is that triggers people's experiences. Because, of course, the problem is as soon as you work out what the trigger is, you can weaponize it, and that's always the danger of that sort of thing. It's a case of, I believe that evolutionary, it's almost sort of going down the X-Men sort of point of view, that what we're doing is we're going through our sort of next stage of evolution, and everyone expects, what does that mean? We're going to have longer thumbs because we use sort of mobile phones and stuff like that. No, what I actually think it is, the next sort of evolution is actually to do with our reception to consciousness, how we actually deal with it. And I think that there's a lot to be said that there will be certain groups that are part of that evolution. We don't know what this sort of final point of that evolution is at the minute. What we're trying to do is, I believe that, as you say, there's the missing link in the traditional evolution, where we're trying to say, right, so to get from here to here, there had to be something there. And I believe that we're going to be doing that with how we are able to use our conscious mind to interact with the environment around us. And like I said, I think what we'll find over time is there'll be the same sort of mutations or the same sort of prevalence, which will then trigger us to go down a particular route.
Well, it's quite weird. It's quite weird that you say this, and this is my question, and it's kind of in the same lines as Dakota. But what I've noticed is, I don't know if you've noticed this, but see people with learning difficulties. Like, I'm dyslexic, and I'm quite sensitive to spirits, and I'm also sensitive to the other ones.
Yep.
And I've noticed that a lot of people I know, there's people in the chat there that have the same problem as me, dyslexia, and they have the same abilities. And I've noticed this, especially in the ghost hunting world. A lot of the people that do like paranormal research or paranormal ghost work or UFO stuff have either got dyslexia or they've got some type of weird side of something that's wrong with them. And it's all. Is there something at work there?
Yes, there is. Absolutely. So I'm telling you, personal sad story is that, so I've got a younger brother who is severely disabled, and unfortunately it is life limiting as well. Right. Now, the sort of condition he's got is MPS 2, and what that means is that the human mind, it doesn't sort of connect all these sort of it doesn't filter all the information out. So literally, he's getting all the information through his mind, all in one go. There is no filtering, and so it means that he's severely limited in, he can't talk. It's a case of, it's a degenerative disorder. But there are certain instances where he will pick up on things very quickly in a room. There's almost sort of things like there's moments of recognition. It's like when you walk into the room, he will sort of smile at you, and he will try and communicate with you. There is something that, I mean, through the time that I've worked with, worked through multiple groups, one of the most common sort of denominators is that there will be people with some sort of mental health issue, and that's absolutely casting no dispersions at all whatsoever. But what it's saying is that their brains are sort of wired slightly different to us. And so the key point saying is that when you experience something, it's all to do with the experience of the observer. And it's a case of someone that is wired slightly differently will interpret things differently. And I think that sometimes gives them a sort of unique insight onto different. I mean, obviously there are certain instances where things like schizophrenia, for example, that can cause a challenge with getting accurate sort of readings from people. But it's not necessarily, it shouldn't be discounted. But it's quite interesting that what spectrum of schizophrenia is it that, okay, this is now medically at the point where it's a case of there is a problem there compared to is there somebody that is actually naturally open to different things. I mean, a great example is that every now and again, I'm sure this happens to everyone, you'll swear blind that somebody has called your voice, has called your name. At some point you'll just go, you'll hear somebody like you, and you go, what was that? And it's a case of trying to interpret what it is now. Terry Waite, I don't know if people will be aware of who he is, but he was a hostage negotiator, and he was very, very famous for bringing out a number of hostages. And at one point, he himself became a hostage. Now, what happened with him, he was talking about the fact that basically he spent a large amount of time with a sack over his head, and so he was actually deprived of a lot of his senses. And what he said is that it started, the time he realised he had a challenge was that when he started to hear music in his head, music got louder and louder. And what it was to do with was the fact that the human mind was actually starved of senses. So what it was doing was it was creating its own stimulation. So again, so you look at one extreme example where the mind itself is creating its own stimulation. It's a case of saying, right then, well, is it possible that need for stimulation is what can also sometimes trigger paranormal or UFO experiences? Is it a case of there is some element of the mind or some part of the mind that actually needs to be actively engaged? And what that will do is it will actually force it to actually look out and look for stuff.
That's fascinating.
Again, it asks a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what to say. I'll hand you over to Dakota.
I'll see. Speaking from personal experience, obviously, I didn't have any sort of mentors that were experienced with paranormal. Yeah, they may have heard like, "Oh, this place is haunted. That place is haunted." Blah, 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 blah. For the longest time, and honestly, that fear kind of still lingers, even though I found a way to start getting tangible evidence that something is happening, that there may be some sort of form of schizophrenia. Then I actually found out, because due to some criminal situations, I was estranged from my father's side of the family. I actually found out that I have a grandmother, my father's mother, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. We finally got into contact. All of a sudden, she started rambling off details about things I went through that she should have had no way of knowing.
Yep.
That was so it was like I was told by certain family members, oh, she speaks to angels. Others say she's schizophrenic. I'm just like, Yeah,
it's incredibly difficult one, because it's also something that really deserves a real sense of, respect and understanding, and not to, jump to any sort of rash conclusions either way, because I think it is a really, really fine line between their actually, literally there being some sort of issue there and actually genuinely do something. And also one of the things I'm quite interested in, and I don't know how necessarily I'd research this in a meaningful way, is that looking at people with dementia and looking at how the mind changes how it works and how it interprets information, whether there is any sort of prevalence of paranormal activity in people that are suffering from dementia. But again, this would have to be done with a huge amount of respect, and you know, you have to be so careful with all sorts of implications of that. But it's one of those questions about, you know, how is it that the human mind is wired, and how big a part that is in what and how people experience.
See, I'm still on this about what if someone right, just listen to me, just listen to this, right? You're in the household. Say there's about 6 people in that household. One of that person thinks that they see a ghost, right? Right? They think about that just so much. They keep thinking about that. Does that bring that into reality for everybody else in the house, even though they don't believe that? What I'm saying is he maybe or she's putting out like maybe a frequency that the other household members are picking it up, and then they're like, "Oh my God, I just seen a nun walk through my room," but it's because of the person in the next room thinking about it.
I can give you a really, really good example of this. So when I was at university, I basically shared a house with 5 of the guys, and now they knew that I at that time, you know, I'd had a couple of experiences, and I foolishly shared that, and so of course they all took the mick out of me, as you expect, right? Okay, but it's a case of what happened for me though was that basically one night I woke up. And there was this large dark shadow standing at the bottom of my bed, and I did the really brave thing of putting my head under the duvet and going, "Go away, please," and he went away. The second night it happened, and this was beginning to freak me out, and I did the same thing. And then the third time it happened, I just went, "Right, what is it you want now then?" What happened was that night, and this is you always have to be very careful with this sort of thing, is that I had a dream. And this dream, basically, this voice said to me, "Open the door." And I said, "No, I'm not going to open the door," because I knew it was this shadow behind the sort of door. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, I opened up the door, and it was this girl with sort of blonde hair, white sort of dress, and she was smiling at me. And I said, "Right, now that I know what you are, I'm not frightened anymore." And when I woke up, there was what I believed was this girl standing at the side of the bed for maybe 10-15 seconds, and she went, and I got hit with this unbelievable feeling of euphoria. Now that in itself, pull that to one side, purely objectively, right, you've had a dream, it's a waking dream, you've just woken up. Yeah. Now then, within that house, I didn't say anything, but one of my housemates' girlfriends freaked out one night because she said that she saw this girl walking down the stairs, and I went, right, okay, so anyhow. And this happened through the year that we're in the house. Each person, in the end, had their own experience with seeing someone around the house, and it interpreted its ways and different things. But 2 days before we moved house, and you can't make this up, we get a knock on the door, and the very first owner of the house, he was a really old gentleman, and he had his son, who would be my age now, so like, you know, I'm 48, and he said, "We used to live here. Would you mind if I came in? Because I just want to show my son what it was he used to live, what it used to be like." And we walked around the house and everything, and all the guys were there because we were just packing up our things. And he'd come around and said, "Oh, thank you ever so much." He was there for about 15 minutes, and I just before he left, I said, "Right, I've got to ask you a question. I'm going to feel a bit of an idiot for asking this question, but did anything strange used to happen in this house?" And he smiled and went, "What, you mean the little girl that used to walk around the house?" And I kind of looked at everyone and went, "See, I told you there was something there." Yeah. That was quite a sort of validating moment for me, because this is a complete stranger that's come into the house and has literally without prompting has said what it was that they saw. But what I believe is that what happens is when people live together for a certain amount of time, what happens is you build up a joint, a sort of a joint link. Now, this is a joint link. Now, what this is actually primeval. Because what happens is that basically when we were cavemen, okay, or cave people, we were basically in caves, and what we were told is to sense something that might be in the cave that's going to want to eat us, okay. And so what happens is if somebody walks into a room, okay, and your back's to the door, you immediately know they've walked in. You immediately know instinctively they've walked in, because everything has electromagnetic sort of field around it, and this is what you pick up on. And what I believe is that when you live with other people, that you kind of almost sort of sync up at some sort of subconscious level. So often, when you are living together, you can experience things that you wouldn't necessarily do. In fact, it's almost like a magnification effect. So for those of you that have ever been to a to a circle or to a spiritual church, often there is I attended one just for a few months, and what I found within that circle of about 15 people is that you could actually magnify experiences because you were all sharing that same sort of experience. And so to go back to your original point, is a case of one person on their own wouldn't necessarily be enough to bring it in, but there is also that sort of level of auto-suggestion which says that, okay then, so you've suggested to it, so now somebody else is thinking about that, and maybe that joint sort of thought is what brings something into the atmosphere. But then you also have to be very careful of that when you're doing investigations, because often what you can do is you can create mass hysteria, where basically somebody hears a noise in the distance, goes, oh my god, what's that? And goes running away, and then everybody else freaks out and runs away. You've got to be the brave person that's kind of got to walk towards it and work out what it is. So I think that partially it's a case of one person, if they trigger something in someone else, then collectively you would potentially be able to bring it in. I think that undoubtedly when people, especially on things like UFO watches, it's a case if you get multiple like-minded people together, it's almost like a beacon that's being created, and it's a case of as long as you have that, I guess if you have that right sort of joint frequency, as it were, because you're almost like resonating with each other as a group, then that can act as a more powerful force and give you maybe more ability as a group. I mean, certainly from a personal experience, my limited sort of paranormal, direct experience, I found that having more people there can actually help, as long as you're not actually driving it with that, oh, did you hear that sort of conversation? It's a case of actually seeing something collectively without the prompt. That's the key point.
That certainly brings a lot of stuff into question, and Chris may actually have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about, because the situation with my daughter.
That's right.
So basically, it just rang true for me, because to kind of make a long story short, supernatural events have been part of my life for nearly as long as I can remember. I was one of those kids who could tell who was on the other end of the phone before it actually rang.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I started going into puberty, about 12 years old, a lot of stuff was going on in my life at that time, and I was led to a point where I tried to take my own life.
Okay.
All of a sudden, something stopped it, or either it happened, but something intervened just enough to get my attention. I was in this blue void. All of a sudden, this man walks up to me and says, Dakota, there's someone here to see you. He steps aside. All of a sudden, there's this little girl. First thing I notice, this little girl looks a lot like me. She runs up to me and says, Daddy, please don't do it. Now, often this little girl would personally appear to me. Then all of a sudden, a situation, we're going on what now, 2 years ago now, Chris, when this happened?
Round about that, yeah.
We were a part of a paranormal investigation group that is trying to revive itself, but pretty much broke up not too long ago. We started looking into an entity known as the Hat Man.
Okay.
Because very, very violent. There's been a couple instances where he was seen around certain violent deaths. All of a sudden, we were doing a stream like this. The Hat Man goes to show up, starts picking off people on screen. There's video of this. Even though the channel was taken down, I have a copy, because potentially first ever case of international demonic possession. It was moving in between.
I wasn't there on that live, but I was watching it.
But he was one of the people that was affected, and there's someone in the chat who was also there, who also got a pretty good brunt of it. There's a couple situations where, let's say one lady, she had been so affected by it that she had to get mental health assistance. She dropped off the grid. another gentleman who was dealing on and off with cancer treatments.
Yeah.
He got most affected, got possessed to where you could physically see his face start changing on the screen. His cancer started coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly but surely, we started working on stuff to break the ties, get everybody back. All of a sudden, and this is where the 20 people I mentioned earlier that all of a sudden blame me for getting heightened experiences all started saying, hey, because some of them knew briefly about the story, some of them didn't. Mm-hmm. They all came to me and say, hey, Dakota, there's this little girl that keeps showing up. And it seems like whenever she showed up, and there may have been others with her, they just couldn't tell. They started breaking the ties. Everybody started getting better. Mm-hmm. I was able to get enough information to where I was able to use artificial intelligence to create an image of this child. Yeah. Let's just say, had some of them not been wearing glasses, the accuracy of the image was enough to where their eyes would have popped out of their sockets. And sure enough, you pull a picture of me when I was about 3 years old, set it next to it, spitting image. And it was a medium of who suggested, she looked at me and says, Dakota, your daughter looks Pleiadian. It's like, you're telling me I had sex with an alien and I don't remember? It's like I say, it's been enough to where it was 15, 20 people, thousands of miles apart. I mean, just as an example, Chris and I, we've never met in person. Yeah. Just as an example. And he's had an experiences that bounced back to me.
Yeah.
So, like I said, what you just said is just like, is that a case where... Did I accidentally manifest? Maybe it'll help find somebody who is very similar, find out who the girl's daughter is.
Yeah.
Or do I have some sort of outside of assistance that I just didn't realize at the time?
So, okay, that's interesting, because what you're also then doing is bringing in the case of the sort of spirit guide, spirit sort of being, and what I believe on that. Well, there's two things here. First of all, I've been in a couple of situations where I've been called out to a private house as part of other paranormal groups, and what I tell people is that to deal with something that is negative, quote unquote, it's a case of you have to remember that you have the power in that situation, even when it's a case of you're really feeling up against it. It's a case of that is basically trying to change your thought process, trying to change the direction that your conscious mind is going. I strongly believe that it is the intent of the words that you say that actually channels your mind to deal with that. And it's a case of, if you were in a group that is being collectively influenced, that group can also flip that round, turn it back, and actually take control of that situation back. I strongly believe that when you have that group, you may be influenced because people want to divert your sort of path from the way you're supposed to be going. Yeah. And it's a case of you actually have the ability, as long as you can attune yourself and resonate as a group, you have the ability to turn stuff away. But it's all about the intent of those words and the strength of that thought that allows you to do it. And again, this is basically about talking about how the conscious mind interacts with reality. And it's a case of, dependent on your point of view, are you saying that it's actually the conscious mind that's creating reality? Is it a part of the reality? It's about how you actually influence that. I think that, again, very, 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 very briefly, I was in a particular house, and this is the only time this has ever happened to me. Is that we're in a house and there is a negative entity in the house, and there's about 5 or 6 other entities in the house, and they can't leave because of this one negative entity. So we basically move that entity on, and it's the sort of physical manifestation of that was when you walked into the house, and it sounds very very classic. That sorry, I just had movement to the right of me. Then it's a case of it was. Yeah, sorry, I maybe lose my train of thought there. Sorry, just bear with me. So what happened was that it was a case of there was a strong smell of sulphur when he went into the house. As we moved things on, there was actually the house became filled with a really strong smell of lavender. Now, the last room we went into was, I believe, it's there again. So I'm sorry, I've got something moving to the right of me as we speak. It's a case of we've got something in the house. We move it. We basically. I'm in the room by myself, and it is a girl. And it's a girl, and this girl says to me, and when you say speak to me, how do you mean that? So if your audience haven't had any sort of spiritual experience, it's a case. What does that actually mean? So what I'm doing is I'm imagining that basically this person is speaking to me. They said they're frightened to go across, and so what I did was I created a door. And basically, with that door, I basically, in my mind, created that mental picture. I took the girl by the hand and I walked her up to the door and I said, I can't take you through the door, but I can take you up to the door. She opened the door and the door opened, and then a woman put her hand out and took her across. And again, the room then just filled with sort of the smell of lavender again. And I was, but then literally when there was that sort of physical sort of walking across in that mental image, it was a case of I was then just drained. I could barely stand. And I've never experienced anything like that. I don't think I'd like to experience it again, to be honest with you. But the challenge I have with that is when you're trying to explain to somebody who's the skeptic mind, then what you would argue is you say, okay, then so has there been some sort of group hysteria there? Is it a case of that from all the sort of walking around that you might have suddenly just got chronic fatigue, because that's how that's affected you, and it's trying to think logically how that works. But what I'm going back to is it's the strength of the thought and it's the strength of the visual image that you create. And so I think there is a real blurring between the conscious mind and reality, because I found with that sort of picture in my mind, I believe that I was able to help somebody to go across. But if you're a skeptic, how can you sort of explain? How can I sort of confirm that has happened? The simple answer is I can't. But what it is a purely subjective experience, down to the individual at that particular time. That's how I interpreted what happened, and through my viewpoint, that's what I believe happened. Whether it did or didn't, that's something I can't confirm. But that's I think a lot of what we have to do, and I think that's the problem, that because a lot of it is such a personal experience, it's very difficult to explain that to somebody without thinking, what are you talking about? It's about, have they got the same context? And this is another key point, that people have to have a context behind their experience to be able to be a part of it, to understand what it is they're actually being asked to do. And I believe that's also an important piece as well. So part of this is about trying to create hypothesis which people can look at, can either think, okay, you've made some interesting points there, I might look and review that. And that's all I ask. So from my experience, from my personal experience, all I'm asking is to listen to some of what I've said and then to go and do your own research. So look at biocentrism, look at string theory, look at resonance, look at Tesla, because this is all out there, this is all open, and all it is giving you some context that might then help you to experience things and might help you to widen your own viewpoint. That's all I ask.
Yeah. So, Dakota, do you have a question before the end of the show? Because that's an hour up. So
that's flown by.
Yeah, no, I swear I blinked and already 20 minutes went by when we first started this thing.
Yeah.
But yeah. So many more questions, so little time. But I got to admit, this has probably been one of our more interesting episodes. It certainly gives a lot to think about. Yeah, it's been absolutely amazing, James. Thank you.
Seriously, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Would you like to give a plug out to any location? Your YouTube, Facebook, anywhere?
Yeah, sure. So I have my own small sort of face group site, which is if you just my website is Paranoia, so that's PARALNOIA.co.uk. Just look on Facebook for Paranoia. It's a small group, more than welcome to join. And like I said, all I'm doing is just asking questions. So thank you very much.
Well, all the links will be below. We'll add them to this. I'm going to join your group tonight because I find it fascinating, and we'll need to get you back on the show sometime again in the near future. And yep, Dakota, do you have any announcements or anything you want to say before the end of the show?
No, I just want to say thank you for everybody who joined us. Thank you to so many people that keep bouncing in lately. This company is starting to skyrocket to places already that none of us ever expected. I do want to give a quick shout out to those who have recently auditioned for the new UFO documentary trailer that's going to be coming up here soon. Over 200 applications that I got to go through, so that's going to be fun. But it definitely goes to show that this is a topic that certainly a lot of people are wanting to get more on. And as you can probably figure, James, we already have kind of we may have an interesting sort of bias to it, but we try to remain objective so that way we're not totally crazy.
When you go? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, thanks again, everybody. Much love. Be safe.
Yep, and have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Friday. And catch you all soon. I'll talk to you behind the scenes, James. Catch you later, dudes.
Take
See you
care.
guys.
Later. Bye.